I got an email from Matt who said, I listen to you all the time and I make sure that I'm in the car at 3 to hear you start the show because it's always so positive and uplifting. How do you manage to stay positive? Got another one from Sandra who said, how do you manage to deal with depression and anxiety during the pandemic? So this is an interesting one. In fact, I've gotten a lot of messages and emails a lot like this. The other day I was like, hey, anybody got anything on their mind that they want to talk about? We have these shorter conversations on the radio, but if you wanted to have something a little bit more drawn out, this could be a good place to do it. And I got a lot of different responses, and so many of them dealt with panic, anxiety, depression, mental health. And what that says to me is that, well, I've noticed something. Whenever I mention mental health on the air, it could be just very slightly in passing, almost immediately I get a flood of emails and messages, and it's almost like there's some sort of dam breaking. And that says to me that a lot of people think about this stuff, but don't necessarily feel as though they have an opportunity to discuss it, or don't know how to discuss it, or any of the above. So, as far as staying positive, there's a reason I'm good at staying positive, and that's because I've had a lot of practice, and that's because for my entire life, pretty much, I've dealt with depression. And this doesn't make me more interesting, this doesn't make me different, this doesn't make me special. This is something that the vast majority of us will deal with at one point or another in our lives. But I dealt with it in kind of a big way and have been for a really, really long time. And there is one tool, one thing that I find to be the absolute be-all, end-all in terms of my personal struggles with depression, and that is exercise. Now, this does not work necessarily for everyone. It's not something that everyone can do, and it's something that I wish I would have discovered earlier in life. But several years ago, I was going to a shrink, and I was like, hey, I think I'm depressed. He was like, oh, you're really, really depressed. Yeah, definitely. And I was like, well, what can I do? And he's like, well, we're going to continue talking about the things that are making you depressed, and we're going to kind of get to the root of them and figure out some of that stuff. But in terms of an immediate quick fix for depression, there's one of two things we can do. We can either medicate you or you can exercise. And I was like, oh, I'll take the medication, please. Thanks. And he was like, are you sure you want to do that? And I was like, well, I certainly don't want to exercise. That doesn't sound like fun. And he was like, here's the thing. I've heard your show. Medication could very easily change your personality. How important is your personality to you? And I was like, personality is important. It sort of pays the mortgage. And yeah, I guess I don't want that happening. And he was like, well, just try exercising 3 times a week. It doesn't have to be for long, but you have to get to the point of sweat. You have to get to the point where there's some blood pumping and your heart's racing a little bit. And so I gave it a go. The effects were almost instant, like overnight. Overnight, my outlook changed. And now it can be really difficult to bear that in mind when you're going through it. But now I know that if I'm really struggling, if I'm going through it, if I'm struggling with anxiety, depression, any of the things that so many people deal with, as long as I can remember and as long as I can find the time to get the heart moving and the blood going, then, well, it very much has an almost immediate effect on my state of mind. And I find that if I don't exercise a few times a week, I can feel a little bit of fog or malaise or whatever you want to call it creeping in. So I make it a priority to exercise. And I find it to be one of the most effective things you can do when it comes to managing your state of mind. And plus, you feel good because you're exercising. You did something good for yourself. Now, look, this is not to say exercise is the be-all, end-all. This is not to say that if you are recommended medication that you shouldn't take it. But when I asked my shrink why it was that everybody doesn't just exercise instead of take medication, he was like, well, look, when you exercise, your body produces a lot of the things that antidepressants do. Serotonin reuptake inhibitors is what I think they're called. Things like Prozac and Wellbutrin and whatnot. He's like, your body will produce those chemicals. I was like, well, why doesn't everybody just exercise then? He's like, well, when you're depressed, it can be very, very difficult to peel yourself off the couch and go do it. So if you're going through that, if you are having a period in your life where you get up and go, got up and went, and you're feeling lousy and you're feeling like you just can't possibly get up and do it, understand this. It will make all the difference in the world. At least that's what I found. Anyways, that is how I stay positive. Now you know.